Some words cut so deep they reshape who you are forever. Fragile. That's what they called her. Alara Sinclair, Omega archivist, keeper of ancient texts, fluent in 6 dead languages including Old Lycan. But in a world where strength meant claws and dominance meant bloodlines, her brilliance meant nothing. She was the daughter of artisan wolves, poor, packless, breakable. The night of the winter solstice gathering, she stood alone at the edge of the grand hall in Thornridge Keep. Crystal, chandeliers threw golden light across marble floors. Alphas in velvet and silk laughed too loudly, their voices sharp as knives. Betas gossiped behind jeweled fans. And there, across the room, stood Marcus, her ex-mate, the one who'd severed their bond 6 months ago because she lacked presence. Tonight, he had his arm around Vivian Ashford, an alpha with a trust fund and a cruel smile. Vivian's voice carried across the hall, deliberately loud. I heard she actually thought she had a chance. With Marcus. Can you imagine? An Omega who spends her days with dusty scrolls thinking she deserves an alpha? Laughter rippled through the crowd like poison. Alara's hands trembled. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and never resurface. This was supposed to be a celebration, the longest night of the year, when wolves honored the moon and forged new alliances. For her, it felt like public execution. Alara came from the Silverwood Artisan Quarter, where wolves made beautiful things, with their hands instead of their fists. Her father carved intricate furniture. Her mother wove tapestries that told pack history in thread and color. They taught her that knowledge was power, that minds could be sharper than any claw. She believed them. She excelled. By 23, she'd been appointed junior archivist at the Royal Library, responsible for translating prophecies and maintaining treaty records. She had a gift, an almost supernatural ability to decode ancient runes that stumped even elder scholars. But none of that mattered at gatherings like this. Here, hierarchy was everything. Alpha, Beta, Omega, and among Omegas, there were still tiers. Wealthy Omegas with connections, beautiful Omegas with influential families. And then there was Alara, brilliant but invisible, powerful but powerless. Marcus had courted her for 3 months. She'd thought he saw past the labels. He'd called her fascinating and unlike anyone else. Then his family got involved. Then the whispers started. Then he looked at her one morning and said, I can't do this anymore. You're just too fragile for my world. The bond break had nearly destroyed her. Severing a mate connection, even an incomplete one, felt like someone reached into your chest and ripped out vital organs. She'd spent 2 weeks unable to eat, her wolf howling inside her in relentless grief. Tonight was supposed to be her return, proof she'd survived. Instead, it was a reminder that some wounds never fully heal. The room fell silent so suddenly that Alara looked up from her misery. King Theon Shadowmane stood in the entrance. He wasn't supposed to be here. The Beast King rarely attended pack gatherings. He was a legend, not a participant. 6 centuries old, cursed with immortality after refusing to execute innocent prisoners during an ancient war. While everyone else aged and died, he remained. Powerful, alone, untouchable. He was massive, even by alpha standards. Nearly 7 feet tall with shoulders that filled doorways and a presence that made the air itself feel heavier. His hair was black as midnight, tied back with leather cord. Scars marked his face and hands, evidence of battles fought over lifetimes. His eyes were molten gold, the mark of an alpha who'd lived through eras most wolves only read about in history books. Every wolf in the room bowed, instinct and protocol. Theon didn't acknowledge them. His gaze swept the hall with the detached interest of someone who'd seen this same scene play out for centuries. Then his eyes locked on Alara. He crossed the room in 10 strides that felt like thunder. The crowd parted like water. Marcus went pale. Vivian's smirk disappeared. Theon stopped directly in front of Alara. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every cell in her body screamed at her to submit, to drop her gaze, to make herself smaller. Instead, she met his eyes. Not in challenge, in recognition. She'd spent 3 years translating his war journals for the archives. She knew his handwriting better than her own. She knew his regrets, his philosophies, his guilt over living while those he loved had died. He tilted his head slightly, curiosity flickering across features that rarely showed emotion. You're the archivist, he said. His voice was deep, textured with centuries. The one who sent the note about the mistranslation in the Crimson Treaty. She'd found an error that had stood uncorrected for 200 years. A single word that completely changed a trade. Agreement's meaning. She'd sent a formal memo to the king's office, never expecting a response. Yes, Your Majesty. Her voice shook, but she kept her spine straight. You were right. He glanced at Marcus and Vivian, then back to Alara. Something cold and dangerous entered his expression. You're sitting with me tonight. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even an invitation. It was a command that rewrote every social rule in the room. Theon sat at the high table and gestured for Alara to take the seat beside him, a position usually reserved for the highest-ranking alphas or visiting dignitaries. She walked through the silent room on legs that barely functioned, feeling hundreds of eyes boring into her back. As she sat, Theon leaned slightly toward her. Pretend you came with me. Why? The word slipped out before she could stop it. Because I despise cruelty disguised as hierarchy. He lifted his glass in a deliberate toast to the room. And because you're more valuable than anyone, fear realizes. The meal began. Servants brought courses, roasted venison, winter root vegetables, honeyed bread. Theon asked her about the archives, about her translation work, about which of his old texts she'd found most challenging. The prophecy cycle from the Fourth Age, she admitted. The syntax doesn't match any known dialect. It's like the author invented their own language. They did. Theon's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. I knew her. Elder Lysa. She was, paranoid about other seers stealing her visions, so she coded everything. Drove everyone around her absolutely insane. Alara blinked. You knew the prophet who wrote the Lost Visions? I know everyone in your history books, Miss Sinclair. I watched them live and die. Something ancient and tired moved through his eyes. It gets lonely being a walking museum. The conversation shifted. He asked about her family, her education, her favorite obscure historical fact. For 20 minutes, the beast, king, terror of battlefields, survivor of impossible wars, gave her his complete attention. Music began. A quartet played traditional winter melodies. Couples moved toward the dance floor. Theon stood and offered his hand. Dance with me. She'd never danced with anyone like him. Theon moved with a warrior's grace, precise, controlled, effortlessly dominant. His hand at her waist was warm through the thin fabric of her dress. Every wolf in the room watched. Halfway through the waltz, Alara stumbled. A nervous misstep. Theon caught her instantly, steadying her without breaking rhythm. Sorry, she whispered, face burning. Don't apologize for being nervous. His voice dropped lower. Apologize for real mistakes. This isn't one. As the dance ended, Marcus appeared. His face was tight with something between anger and shame. Alara, we need to talk. Theon didn't move, didn't release her. His golden eyes fixed on Marcus with the flat attention a predator gives prey. No, Theon said, simply. You don't. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. Years of conditioning won. You didn't argue with the Beast King. He backed away. Vivian, however, had less sense or more arrogance. Your Majesty, surely you're not seriously interested in— Choose your next words very carefully, Theon interrupted, his tone colder than winter stone. I've ended conflicts with less provocation than you're currently offering. Vivian went silent. The surrounding crowd took an unconscious step back. Theon guided Alara toward the terrace doors. You need air, so do I. The gardens were covered in frost, every branch glittering under moonlight. The noise of the gathering faded to muffled music and distant voices. Alara's breath came out in visible clouds. Why are you doing this? She asked. Theon leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out over the winter landscape. Because I watched you stand there alone, absorbing cruelty you didn't deserve, and I remembered what it feels like to be judged by metrics that have nothing to do with worth. You're the most powerful alpha alive. You can't possibly understand. I've been called monster, beast, abomination. His jaw tightened. I've been feared, worshipped, and isolated for 6 centuries. Power doesn't erase loneliness, Miss Sinclair. It amplifies it. They stood in silence. Finally, Alara spoke. Marcus warned me before, told me powerful people only use omegas like me, that I was naive to think otherwise. Your ex-mate is a coward who broke something valuable because he lacked the spine to defend it. Theon turned to face her. I'm not using you. I'm recognizing you. There's a difference. What happens tomorrow? When the gathering ends and you go back to being the unreachable king? Tomorrow, Theon said carefully. You come to the palace. I'm establishing an elite translation council. I want you leading it. Why? Because you're brilliant. Because the kingdom needs minds like yours. And because... He stopped, something unguarded flickering across his face. I'd like to see you again. The next morning, a royal carriage arrived at Alara's modest apartment in the artisan quarter. Inside was a formal appointment letter and a handwritten note in Theon's distinctive script. Yesterday was not charity. It was recognition. You have 3 days to decide. Choose yourself, Miss Sinclair. I think you're worth it. T. She stared at the letter for an hour. This was insane. Kings didn't pursue archivists. Legends. Didn't see fragile omegas as equals. This had to be some elaborate mistake or temporary fascination. But when she closed her eyes, she felt his hand steadying her when she stumbled. Heard his voice saying, "You're more valuable than anyone here realizes." 3 days later, she stood at the palace gates with a trunk of belongings and a racing heart. Theon met her in the grand library, a cathedral of books that smelled like leather and ancient paper. He looked relieved. I wasn't certain you'd... Come! I wasn't certain either. She set down her trunk. But you were right. I needed to choose myself. He smiled. A real smile that transformed his scarred, serious face into something almost boyish. Then let's begin. The next 6 weeks were the strangest of Alara's life. She led the translation council, working directly with scholars 3 times her age. Theon attended every meeting, contributing insights from personal experience that no text could provide. Their professional respect deepened into friendship. Friendship warmed into something more dangerous. He asked her to dinner, then to walk the palace grounds, then to accompany him to council sessions where her observations on historical precedent influenced modern policy. The court noticed. Whispers became murmurs. Murmurs became open speculation. Lady Seraphina Blackthorne, head of the royal council, requested a private audience with Alara. You seem like an intelligent young woman, Seraphina began, her tone surgical. So, I'll be direct. The king is 600 years old. He doesn't form attachments. He certainly doesn't court omegas from artisan families. Whatever you think is happening, it isn't. With respect, Lady Seraphina, my relationship with the king is not your concern. Everything involving the king is my concern. Seraphina's eyes hardened. He needs an alliance marriage with Alpha Katrina of the Northern Reach. Political stability requires it. You're a temporary distraction. Don't delude yourself into believing you're anything more. Alara left the meeting shaking. That night, she tried to create distance, declined Theon's dinner invitation, avoided his gaze in council meetings. He cornered her in the archives 3 days later. What happened? Nothing. Alara. He said her name like a command and a plea. Talk to me. You need an alliance marriage. I'm a distraction you'll regret. Lady Seraphina made it very clear. Seraphina doesn't dictate my life. Theon's voice turned sharp. Neither does political convenience. I'm asking what you want. I want to stop feeling like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like you'll wake up one day and realize I'm exactly what Marcus said. Too fragile, too beneath you, too temporary. Then I need to tell you the truth. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking exhausted. The curse that made me immortal has conditions. I can die if I choose it, but I can also break it permanently if I form a true mate bond. The kind that goes soul deep. I stopped looking for that centuries ago because everyone I loved died while I stayed the same. I resigned myself to eternity alone. He stepped closer. Then you walked into my life, and for the first time in 600 years, I want to try. Alara returned to the archives that night, unable to sleep. She pulled the Lost Visions texts, the ones she'd been translating for months, Elder Lysa's impossible syntax. Then something clicked, a pattern in the grammar she'd missed. She worked for 4 hours straight, coffee growing cold at her elbow, until the coded language finally made sense. The translation emerged. When the deathless king finds the wolf who translates dead words into living wisdom, the curse of solitude breaks. She will be marked fragile by those who fear her strength. He will be named beast by those who fear his heart. In their union, immortality bows to choice, and winter yields to spring eternal. Her hands shook. This was a prophecy about them, written 400 years before she was born. She brought the translation to Elder Magnus, the head archivist, a wolf whose scholarly reputation was unimpeachable. He studied it for 2 days, consulted other experts, ran linguistic analyses. It's accurate. he finally confirmed. This prophecy specifically identifies King Theon and describes an Omega scholar. The details match you precisely. Word spread through the palace. A prophecy gave them legitimacy. It gave Alara a shield against accusations of social climbing and Theon a justification beyond personal desire. Prophecies are subject to interpretation, she argued. We can't base political stability on ancient riddles. The Northern Reach alliance must proceed. The council divided. Half supported Theon's right to choose, half demanded political pragmatism. A crisis arrived from the eastern border. The Ironwood Pack, led by a power-hungry alpha named Darius, declared territorial disputes and mobilized for war. They claimed historical rights to lands that had been formally ceded 2 centuries ago. The council prepared for conflict. Theon began strategic planning. Casualties were inevitable. Alara spent 3 sleepless nights in the archives, searching treaty records and historical boundaries. There had to be another way. War would cost hundreds of lives. Wolves who had families, futures, value beyond being chess pieces in political disputes. On the 4th night, she found it. A treaty from 1823 signed by Darius's great-great-grandfather that explicitly renounced all claims to the disputed territory in exchange for trade concessions that had been fulfilled. The document had been misfiled, hidden in agricultural records instead of diplomatic ones. She brought it to the council at dawn, still in yesterday's clothes, ink-stained and exhausted. This invalidates Ironwood's entire claim, Elder Magnus confirmed after examination. It's legally binding and historically documented. Theon dispatched diplomats. With the treaty, Darius, faced with irrefutable proof and the humiliation of public invalidation, withdrew his forces. War was averted, not through violence, but through knowledge. The council chambers erupted in relief and celebration. Seraphina's opposition crumbled. Even she couldn't argue against results. Theon looked at Alara with something beyond gratitude. You just saved hundreds of lives with research and determination. Still think you're too fragile? 2 weeks later, Theon invited Wayne, Alara to the palace gardens at sunset, the same terrace where they'd first spoken alone, now softened by early spring. Snow had melted. Crocuses pushed through soil. The longest winter was ending. I need to ask you something, Theon began, and Alara had never seen him nervous before. I've lived 6 centuries. I've fought wars, survived impossible odds, watched generations rise and fall, but I've never done this. He knelt. The Beast King, terror of battlefields, survivor of ages, knelt before her. Alara Sinclair, you are the most brilliant, courageous wolf I've ever known. You don't need me to validate your worth, but I'm asking you to choose me anyway. Not because of prophecy or politics, because I love you. Because you make immortality feel like a gift instead of a curse. Will you be my mate? My queen? My partner in every sense that matters? She'd been called fragile her entire life. Too soft, too weak, too easily broken. But standing there with the most powerful alpha alive, asking her to choose him, she finally understood. Fragility wasn't weakness. It was the courage to stay soft in a world that demanded hardness. To remain open when closing off felt safer. To choose love despite every reason to protect yourself. Yes, she said. Yes, to all of it. The mate bond formed instantly, a golden thread that tied their souls together across mortality and immortality. Theon gasped, his eyes widening with wonder. I can feel you, he whispered. For 600 years, I've been alone in my own head. Now I can feel you. Then you're never alone again. The mating ceremony happened under the full moon in the palace gardens. Simple, intimate, witnessed by both royal court and artisan quarter. Theon wore formal black. Alara wore her mother's woven gown, carrying flowers her father had grown. Elder Magnus officiated, incorporating the prophecy into the traditional vows. When Theon marked Alara's throat with his bite, sealing the bond permanently, the ancient magic of the curse shattered. He would still live far longer than most wolves, but he was no longer trapped in endless immortality. He could age. He could eventually rest. And he would do it beside her. Alara established protocols that changed Omega rights throughout the kingdom. Scholarship programs, legal protections, representation in council. She used her position not for revenge against those who'd mocked her, but for systemic change that meant no Omega would face the same barriers she had. Marcus sent a formal apology letter. She burned it without reading. Vivian tried to curry favor, Alara politely declined every invitation. Lady Seraphina became, surprisingly, one of her staunchest allies. I was wrong about you, the older woman admitted. Strength comes in forms I failed to recognize. You'll make a remarkable queen. Theon and Elara ruled together, his experience and her innovation creating a partnership that transformed the kingdom. She translated ancient wisdom. He provided historical context. Together, they made decisions that honored both tradition and progress. The palace library expanded into a public institution. Wolves from every background could access knowledge that had once been restricted to nobles. The Translation Council became a permanent fixture, advising on everything from treaty negotiations to cultural preservation. And every night, when the work was done, Theon and Elara returned to their private quarters, to the quiet intimacy of two souls who'd found each other across centuries and social divides. Do you ever regret it? Elara asked one night, curled against his chest. Giving up immortality for me? I gave up immortality for us. Theon kissed the top of her head. And I'd do it again without hesitation. I spent 600 years surviving. You taught me how to live. 5 years later, the kingdom celebrated the Festival of Broken Curses, a new holiday commemorating the day the Beast King chose mortality and love over lonely eternity. In the archives, a new section opened, the Elara Wing, dedicated to preserving Omegaverse history and elevating Omega voices that had been systematically silenced. On the wall, carved in stone, were the words Elara had chosen. Knowledge is strength, love is power, and fragility is the bravest thing we can choose to be. She stood before it, one hand resting on her swollen belly, pregnant with their first child. Theon appeared beside her, wrapping his arms around them both. What are you thinking? He asked. That the worst night of my life led to the best years. She leaned back against him. That sometimes what breaks you is what lets the light in. Profound and poetic, very on brand for my brilliant queen. She laughed. Insufferable and charming. Very on brand for my beast. Outside, spring had fully arrived. The gardens bloomed, children played, and two wolves who'd been called fragile and beastly stood together. Proof that the names others give you don't define who you choose to become. Did the Beast King's love story capture your heart? Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss these powerful romances where underdogs become queens and beasts become heroes. Drop crowned in the comments if you want part 2, exploring Theon's past and the witch who cursed him. Tell me, do you believe in fated mates or do we choose our own destiny? Let's talk about love, power, and prophecy in the comments. Your engagement keeps these stories alive. Until the next legend finds you, remember, you're never too fragile to be exactly what someone needs. See you in the next tale.